April 18th, 1906. San Francisco is rocked awake at 5:12 a.m. Flames tear through 400 city blocks, and engineers scramble to clear the ruins. That's the story everyone knows. But as crews dig, they break into chambers so deep and oddly built that official notes quietly whisper of pre-existing tunnels and unexpected depth. What they find beneath San Francisco does not match any city record, leaving one question history refuses to answer. How did these tunnels get here, and who buried the truth? The earthquake struck at 5:12 in the morning, tearing through San Francisco with a force that shattered windows from the waterfront to the hills. Within minutes, buildings collapsed in the business district, and entire blocks along Market Street buckled into heaps of brick and timber. The first tremors lasted less than a minute, but the destruction they left behind was staggering. Gas mains ruptured, igniting fires that raced unchecked through the city. By sunrise, flames had already reached the heart of Chinatown and were advancing on Nob Hill. Over the next 3 days, fire consumed more than 400 city blocks, leaving a blackened landscape stretching from the Ferry Building to Van Ness Avenue. Amid the chaos, teams of municipal engineers moved quickly to assess the damage. Their orders were clear: clear the debris, stabilize what remained, and determine if the ground itself could support the weight of a rebuilt metropolis. The scale of the destruction meant ordinary cleanup would not be enough. Streets were blocked by piles of stone and twisted iron, while cellars and basements had collapsed into tangled pits. In some neighborhoods, the ground had sunk several feet, swallowing entire rows of houses. Engineers faced a city that no longer matched any map. Water lines and sewers had burst or vanished beneath the rubble. Firefighters, desperate for water, found hydrants dry and mains shattered. The Board of Public Works issued emergency orders, and by the end of the first week, hundreds of laborers were digging day and night. Crews began removing debris not just from the surface, but from deep below, clearing out what remained of the city's buried pipes and tunnels. The city's survival depended on their work. Without a stable foundation, nothing above ground could be rebuilt. Every decision, where to dig, what to clear, how deep to go, carried the weight of San Francisco's future. In the hands of these engineers, the city's fate turned on what they found beneath the ruins. Pickaxes struck something harder than collapsed brick and scorched timber. Beneath the layers of earthquake debris, crews found themselves facing walls of fitted stone arching away into darkness. The first breakthrough happened on what had once been a busy intersection, now a crater, its edges lined with men in dust-covered uniforms. No one had expected to find open space beneath the rubble, let alone corridors tall enough for a man to stand upright. Some workers, thinking they had uncovered a forgotten sewer or an old cistern, lowered lanterns and peered inside. The light flickered across brickwork that looked nothing like the city's known utility tunnels. Survey photographs from the winter of 1906 captured labourers clustered at the mouth of these passages, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. The tunnels stretched on, brick-lined with mortar joints so fine that even in the grainy images, the craftsmanship stood out. Internal notes from the Board of Public Works began to include new phrases: pre-existing tunnels, unexpected depth, origin unknown. The language was careful, almost cautious, as if the writers were not sure what they were documenting. One field report described a chamber large enough to fit a horse-drawn wagon, yet absent from every city map. Another noted that water pooled and drained in ways that did not match any known sewer plan. Workers traced corridors that twisted beneath ruined blocks, sometimes finding intersections where multiple tunnels met at precise angles. The stonework felt ancient, and the air inside was colder than the city above. Day after day, as more debris was cleared, the network grew. Some passages ended abruptly in walls of packed earth, others continued on, disappearing into darkness. Each discovery raised new questions. Who had built these tunnels? Why did they run so deep, and why had no one recorded them before? For the crews on the ground, the city's greatest mystery was no longer what had been destroyed, but what had always been hidden just beneath their feet. Field engineers began mapping the newly exposed tunnels, expecting the usual chaos of mismatched pipes and haphazard repairs. Instead, their diagrams revealed something that made little sense. Each tunnel, no matter how deep or old, ran in perfect parallel with the streets above. Post-quake construction, Victorian-era sewers, and even the oldest stone passages all followed the same grid. Every axis, every angle, every intersection aligned as if drawn from a master plan. Survey teams overlaid their measurements and found that the orientation of the newest infrastructure matched layers buried meters below, separated by decades or even centuries of construction. Drainage channels cut through bedrock in the lowest strata trace the same paths as modern water mains. One engineer reviewing field sketches noted that the tunnels beneath Market Street and the ruins of Nob Hill mirrored the street grid with uncanny accuracy, even where surface roads had shifted over time. The alignment extended to side corridors which branched off at precise right angles, just as city planners had designed above-ground blocks. In places where the city had expanded or rebuilt after earlier fires, the subterranean routes still conformed to the same invisible template. These findings challenged every assumption about how the city had grown. Different eras of builders, working with different tools and blueprints, should have left a patchwork of tunnels and utilities. Instead, the evidence suggested a single underlying order, an architectural logic that predated official records and outlasted every disaster. The deeper they mapped, the clearer it became. San Francisco's foundations rested on a grid that no living engineer could explain. Workers crouched at the tunnel mouths, lanterns raised, eyes tracing the sweep of stone arches overhead. What they found did not match any city blueprint or known Victorian construction. The brickwork ran in perfect, unbroken bands, each brick set so tightly that even the tip of a knife could not slip between the joints. Mortar lines were almost invisible, and the bricks themselves were uniform in color and size. No warped edges, no mismatched shades, no sign of hurried repairs. In their field notes, engineers tried to describe what they saw: masonry of a grade not present in city records, arches with flawless curvature, precision far exceeding any sewer or cellar previously surveyed. One chamber measured over 20 feet across, its ceiling a continuous vault of brick, unsupported by any timber or iron. Even under the harsh light of early photography, the craftsmanship stood out, arches so regular that their curves appeared drawn by compass, not by hand. Some passages ran for dozens of yards without a single crack or bulge. The walls felt cool and smooth, the surfaces almost polished. Where tunnels branched, the intersections met at precise right angles, the brickwork folding seamlessly from one corridor to the next. Nothing in the city's history explained how these chambers had been built, or why their construction so clearly surpassed anything above ground. For the engineers, the evidence was difficult to ignore. Someone, at some point, had achieved a level of precision in underground masonry that the city's own records could not account for. Pickaxes and shovels scraped against what felt like packed stone, but the sound was wrong. Thicker, duller, almost as if the tools were striking earth fused into rock. Crews chipped away at the barrier, expecting to break through to more tunnel, only to find dense layers of hardened mud filling entire passageways. Excavation logs from the winter of 1906 note the confusion. Workers mistook the mud for bedrock, reporting that some chambers were so thoroughly sealed it took days to clear even a few feet. Beneath the surface, the air grew heavy, tinged with the smell of damp earth that had not moved in decades, maybe longer. The deeper they dug, the stranger it became. In some sections, the mud was layered, fine silt pressed between bands of coarser sediment, as if deposited in deliberate stages. In others, the material was so compacted that lanterns barely illuminated the tunnel beyond, the walls closing in with a suffocating silence. Labourers described the sensation of moving through a grave, not a ruin. One foreman wrote, "We struck earth so tightly packed that it rang like stone. No water, no roots, just dead weight." The question haunted every shift. Was this the aftermath of a flood no one remembered? Or had these tunnels been purposefully entombed? City records offered no help, no mention of ancient waterways, no disaster on record to explain this depth of burial. The mud seemed to erase history, sealing off corridors that should have been open, locking away whatever secrets had been left behind. The dilemma lingered in every logbook: accident or intent. The answer remained buried, just out of reach, as the crews pressed on. Beneath the shattered streets, workers uncovered something that stopped even the most seasoned engineers in their tracks. Massive, perfectly cylindrical shafts plunged straight down through layers of earth and brick. Unlike the rough-hewn wells or irregular mining pits familiar to the era, these shafts kept uniform diameters for dozens of meters, with walls so smooth that lantern light seemed to glide across their surfaces. Field notes recorded the measurements. Some shafts were more than 6 feet wide, dropping vertically with a precision that defied the hand tools and blasting methods of the early 20th century. The geometry was exact, the curvature flawless from rim to base, as if the earth itself had been cored by a machine more advanced than any known to the city's builders. Engineers tried to compare the structures to known features such as water wells, ventilation shafts, or natural sinkholes, but nothing fit. The depth alone raised questions. In some places, ropes vanished into darkness before touching bottom. In others, the walls were lined with brick or stone so tightly set that not a single gap interrupted the pattern. Reports describe the sensation of peering down into these voids, the air cold and still, the drop echoing with the faintest sound. No city records mention such features. No construction logs, no property surveys, no blueprints showed shafts of this scale or design. The official explanations, old wells, collapsed cellars, natural formations, fell apart under even basic scrutiny. The engineering on display suggested a purpose far beyond simple access or drainage, hinting at a system whose design and execution belonged to a different order of craftsmanship entirely. Brick pillars rose out of the mud, thicker than any support needed for a simple tunnel. Some stood over 5 feet wide, stretching upward to meet the arched ceilings with a precision that left even experienced engineers unsettled. In the dim light, these pillars looked less like the work of hurried laborers and more like the bones of a structure built to last centuries. Field sketches from the Board of Public Works show rows of these supports, evenly spaced, running beneath entire city blocks. In places, the foundations extended well beyond the footprint of any building that ever stood above them, walls vanishing into darkness, their purpose impossible to guess from the ruins overhead. Engineers measured the distances and found a pattern. The pillars and walls formed a grid, repeating every few dozen feet, as if designed to hold up something vast and heavy. Some pillars supported nothing at all, standing in open chambers with no sign of collapse or damage. Others were buried behind layers of hardened mud, their surfaces untouched by fire or quake. The scale was unsettling. Calculations in the margins of field notes questioned why so much material had been used and for what load. No city record called for supports this size, and no above-ground structure had ever required such deep, extensive foundations. The deeper crews mapped, the more the underground began to look like its own city. Rows of pillars, walls stretching block after block, corridors intersecting at right angles. The logic was unmistakable, but the reason remained out of reach. For the men who spent their days underground, the sense grew that they were not just clearing debris, but uncovering the remains of a forgotten order, one that had shaped the city from below long before the earthquake ever struck. In the months after the earthquake, a records clerk named Samuel Dorsey found himself sorting through a flood of engineering notes, survey sketches, and field reports. In the earliest files, the language was direct, measurements, locations, and details about brickwork and tunnel dimensions. But something changed as the year wore on. By the middle of 1907, official documents began to thin out. Descriptions of the deepest tunnels grew vague, replaced by phrases such as pre-existing utilities or earlier construction, origin undetermined. Where once there had been detailed diagrams and hand-drawn maps, now there were only summaries or references to files that never surfaced. Photographs too became harder to track. Instead of being collected in a single municipal archive, images of the largest chambers and most unusual features were scattered, some filed with the Department of Public Works, others tucked away in engineering journals, and a few appearing only as blurry contact prints with no explanation. Dorsey noticed that the most transparent project of the era, the Mile Rock Tunnel, was documented from start to finish, with blueprints, progress photos, and technical reports. In contrast, the records for the tunnels found beneath the city after the quake were inconsistent, as if someone had decided what should be remembered and what should quietly disappear. The silence in the archives became its own kind of evidence, raising questions that no official report was willing to answer. By the end of 1906, a new set of instructions began circulating among city supervisors and public works foremen. Certain excavation sites, especially those where tunnels ran deepest or where chambers remained intact, were singled out for immediate closure. The official language cited safety, but the logs told a different story. Backfill orders for these locations arrived faster and with more urgency than for any damaged street or surface ruin. Overlay maps from early 1907 show a pattern. The oldest, cleanest, and most structurally sound underground spaces were the first to disappear beneath tons of earthquake debris. Some of these passages had stood untouched by fire or collapse, their walls unbroken, their arches unscarred. Yet crews were told to seal them, sometimes before a full survey could be completed. In the ledgers, the same addresses repeat: Nob Hill, the old Market Street corridor, and a handful of sites near the waterfront, always marked for prioritised fill. The rationale, on paper, was risk mitigation. But why bury what had survived both earthquake and fire? Why rush to erase the very evidence that most defied explanation? The answers, if they exist, remain buried with the tunnels themselves, leaving only questions in their place. Beneath every city, history leaves marks, some mapped, many erased. Today, unexplained gaps in the record remind us what's hidden underground shapes the stories we tell above. As urban development accelerates, each layer we build may bury answers we haven't yet asked. Sometimes the real mystery isn't what is lost, but what we choose not to see. What do you think lies beneath your own city?